Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, you might want to leave the lights on for this one. Tonight, we're going somewhere most people think is peaceful. Majestic even. We're going to the mountains. People love the mountains. The fresh air. The silence. The feeling that you're completely alone up there, far away from the noise of the world. But that silence, that's the thing nobody talks about. Because sometimes, when it gets quiet enough, you start to hear things you were never supposed to hear. And sometimes, when you call out into that open mountain air, something calls back. Tonight, I have 4 stories for you. 4 real accounts from 4 different people who went into the mountains and came back, changed. Some of them barely came back at all. These are their stories. Stay with me. Because once the echoes start answering back, you'll never look at a mountain the same way again. This first story comes from a man named Daniel Prescott. Daniel is in his mid-40s now, living in a quiet suburb in Colorado. He doesn't go camping anymore. He hasn't gone since the summer of 2019. And when he finally agreed to share what happened to him up on the slopes of the San Juan Mountains, he said something that stuck with me before he even started telling the story. He said, I don't think what I saw was an animal. And I don't think it was a person either. I think it was something that had learned how to be both. Let that sink in for a second. Okay. Let's go back to July of 2019. Daniel had been planning this solo camping trip for almost a year. He'd been going through a rough divorce, work had been stressful, and he needed to get away. Not a hotel, not a resort. He wanted raw wilderness. He wanted to feel small in a way that had nothing to do with his personal problems. He wanted the mountains. He drove up to the San Juan Range in southwestern Colorado, a beautiful, remote stretch of wilderness that most tourists don't bother with because it's not as accessible as some of the more popular spots. That was exactly why Daniel chose it. No crowds. No noise. Just him and the peaks. He parked at a trailhead around noon on a Friday, strapped on his 50-liter pack, and started hiking. His plan was simple: hike about 8 miles in, find a good flat spot near one of the alpine lakes marked on his topographic map, set up camp, spend 2 nights, and hike back out Sunday morning. The hike-in was beautiful. He described it as one of those rare moments where you feel like the world was made just for you. Wildflowers on every slope. A sky so blue it almost looked fake. The air up there was thin but clean, and with every breath, he felt the tension of the last 8 months just loosening. He found his spot right around 4 in the afternoon. A small, flat shelf of land above a crystal-clear alpine lake. The kind of place you'd see on a postcard. He set up his tent, gathered some wood, and had a fire going by the time the sun started dipping behind the peaks. He cooked his dinner, dehydrated pasta, nothing fancy, sat back, and just watched the sky turn pink and then purple and then black. And then the stars came out. Daniel told me he sat there for almost 2 hours just staring at the sky. No phone signal. No notifications. No noise. Just the crackling of his fire, and the occasional soft ripple of the lake below him. He was happy. Really, genuinely happy. For the first time in a long time. That's when he saw the other fire. At first, he thought it was a reflection on the lake. Some trick of moonlight, or starlight bouncing off the water in a weird way. But he looked closer, and it wasn't on the lake. It was on the other side of the lake. Up on a ridge, maybe half a mile away. A fire. Small, orange, flickering. Unmistakably a campfire. Now, Daniel's first reaction wasn't fear. It was mild disappointment. He'd specifically chosen this remote spot to be alone, and now there was someone else out here. He thought, fine, whoever it is, they're far enough away. It's a big wilderness. No big deal. He watched the fire for a few minutes, and then he went to bed. He woke up around 2 in the morning because he needed to use the bathroom. He unzipped his tent, stepped outside, handled his business, and then stood there for a moment in the cold night air just looking around. The sky was incredible. The Milky Way was visible in a way it never is from any city or suburb. He stood there, a little cold, tilting his head back and just staring. And then, almost unconsciously, he looked across the lake at the ridge. The fire was still going. He thought that was a little weird. Most campers let their fires die down before sleeping. But maybe these people were night owls, he thought. Or maybe they just built a bigger fire. He didn't think too much about it. He went back to bed. Morning came clear and warm. Daniel made coffee on his camp stove, ate a granola bar, and felt like a new man. He decided to hike around the lake that morning, explore a little, see if he could find any good fishing spots. As he walked around the western edge of the lake, he naturally started approaching the ridge where he'd seen the fire the night before. He wasn't specifically going there. It was just in the general direction of his hike. He climbed up the ridge, expecting to find a campsite. A tent, maybe some gear, the ash from last night's fire. There was nothing. He stood there and looked around. The ridge was rocky and covered in sparse alpine grass. There was no cleared ground where a tent would have been. No fire ring. No ash. No footprints in the soft dirt between the rocks. No food wrappers, no gear marks, nothing. It looked completely untouched. Daniel told me he stood there for a long time trying to figure out if he had the right ridge. Maybe he'd misidentified the location in the dark. He looked back across the lake at his own campsite and tried to triangulate. No. This was definitely the right ridge. This was right where the fire had been. He shook it off. Decided maybe the other campers had been incredibly careful, packed out all their trash, smoothed over the ground. Leave no trace and all that. Good for them. He hiked back around the lake, spent the rest of the day exploring, took a nap in the afternoon, and watched the sunset again from his campsite. When darkness fell, the fire appeared on the ridge again. Same spot. Same size. Same steady, orange flicker. Daniel stared at it for a long time. He told me his stomach started doing something uncomfortable. Not full-blown panic, but something beneath the surface. An instinct telling him something wasn't right. He thought about calling out across the lake. Saying hello? But the lake was too wide, easily 300 or 400 meters across, and the ridge was even farther. They'd never hear him. He thought about grabbing his headlamp and hiking around the lake to investigate. But it was dark, and the terrain was uneven, and something about the idea made him deeply uneasy. The kind of uneasy that doesn't have a logical explanation. Just a deep, animal sense of don't. So instead, he sat and watched the fire. And that's when he noticed the first strange thing. The fire wasn't moving. Not in the way a campfire moves. A real campfire dances. The flames shift and reach and pull back. Even from half a mile away, you can see that organic, chaotic movement. This fire wasn't doing that. It was incredibly still. The light flickered, yes, but in a pattern. Almost rhythmic. Like a slow pulse. He watched it for 20 minutes. 30. An hour. It pulsed. Over and over. Steadily. Slowly. Daniel went to bed, but he didn't sleep well. In the morning, he decided he was going to pack up and leave a day early. He told himself it was because he'd gotten what he needed from the trip, that he felt rested and recharged, that he was ready to head home. But really, he just wanted to leave. He was breaking down his tent when he noticed something in the dirt near the edge of his campsite. Just at the boundary of where the flat ledge dropped down toward the lake. Footprints. Not boot prints. Not the kind you'd make wearing hiking boots or trail runners. These were bare feet. Long, narrow, with slightly unusual spacing between the toes. And they were pointed inward. Toward his tent. Daniel stood there looking at those prints for what felt like a very long time. He counted them. There were 6 steps, coming from the direction of the lake and stopping about 4 feet from the edge of his tent. Just stopping. Like whoever had been walking had paused there, standing, for an unknown amount of time. And then nothing. No prints going back. No prints continuing. Just those 6 steps and then empty ground. He packed his gear in record time. He practically ran back down the trail. 8 miles in 90 minutes, barely stopping once. When he got to his car, he sat in the driver's seat for a long time before he started the engine. His hands were shaking. He looked in the rearview mirror, back up at the mountains behind him. And on a far ridge, barely visible in the morning light, he could have sworn he saw a thin curl of smoke. Daniel told me he looked into the San Juan Wilderness records when he got home. There were no registered campers in that area for that weekend. He was the only one who'd signed the trailhead log. He said he never found an explanation for the fire, for the missing campsite, or for the footprints. But the thing that stays with him, the thing that wakes him up at night sometimes, isn't any of those things. It's this. When he thinks back on those 2 nights, watching that pulsing fire, he has this feeling. This creeping, nauseating feeling. That whatever was over on that ridge was watching him back. Our second story tonight involves a group of college students, and it's the kind of story that makes you want to grab every young person you know and say, when the locals tell you something, you listen. The 4 people in this story are Mara, Josh, Tiffany, and a guy everyone called Rocket. His real name was Brendan, but nobody called him that. This happened in September of 2021, in the Appalachian Mountains, specifically along a section of trail in western North Carolina not far from the Tennessee border. Now, this part of the Appalachians is old. Not just geologically old, but culturally old. The Cherokee have lived in and around these mountains for thousands of years, and even the white settlers who came later developed their own deep, generational relationship with these specific hills and hollows. The people who grow up there have a different way of relating to the land. They know things that outsiders don't. That's the context. Keep that in mind. Mara was the one who organized the trip. She was a junior at UNC Chapel Hill studying environmental science, and she'd been wanting to do a multi-day Appalachian Trail section hike for a long time. She got Josh, her boyfriend, Tiffany, her roommate, and Rocket, who was Tiffany's on and off boyfriend, to come along. They drove out on a Friday, planning to hike on Saturday morning, camp 2 nights, and come out Monday morning. Classic long weekend trip. Saturday morning they loaded up at the trailhead and started the ascent. The first part of the hike was gorgeous. Dense forest, rhododendron tunnels, the sound of running water everywhere. Classic southern Appalachian beauty. Around midday, they stopped for lunch at a small general store that sat at a crossroads near the trail. One of those old mountain stores that sells bait and canned beans and pocket knives and has a couple of old men sitting on the porch who look like they've been there since the Civil War. Mara went inside to buy snacks. There was a woman behind the counter, probably in her 60s, with deep-set eyes and the kind of face that looks like it's been weathered by decades of mountain wind. She was friendly enough, asked where they were headed, nodded along as Mara described their route. And then Mara mentioned they were planning to push on past Greystone Ridge that evening to reach their campsite. The woman's expression changed. Not dramatically, she didn't gasp or grab Mara's arm. It was more subtle than that. A tightening around the eyes. A slight pause before she spoke. She said, "You want to be through that ridge before dark. Don't be on that trail after dark." Mara, being a practical, scientifically minded 20-year-old, asked why. The woman just looked at her for a moment, and then said, "Because there are things on that trail at night that don't want to be seen. And when they know you've seen them anyway, they don't let it go." Mara thanked her for the information and went back outside. She told the group what the woman had said. Rocket laughed and called it a local superstition. Josh said it was probably just a bear warning, and the woman had a flair for the dramatic. Tiffany said it was creepy, but she agreed with Josh. Probably bears or coyotes or something. They decided to push on. The afternoon hike was pleasant, and they made good time. By 4 o'clock, they were approaching Greystone Ridge. Mara checked her map and confirmed they'd be through the ridge and at their campsite well before sunset. Everything was on schedule. And then Josh twisted his ankle. It wasn't a serious injury. He didn't break anything. But he came down wrong on a loose stone about a mile from the ridge, and the ankle swelled immediately. Not enough to stop him from walking, but enough to slow him way down. What would have been a 30-minute stretch suddenly became over an hour and a half. By the time they reached the top of Greystone Ridge, the sun was almost touching the horizon. Mara looked at the descent ahead of them, another mile or so of rocky, narrow trail before it leveled out into the forest where their campsite was, and she thought about the woman at the store. She said to the group, "Maybe we should camp here at the ridge tonight." Josh's ankle, and the woman said, "Mara." That was Rocket. "It's fine. It's just going to be dark for like 20 minutes before we get to the campsite. We have headlamps. Let's go." Tiffany agreed. Josh said he was fine. And so they started down the other side of the ridge as the last light began to fade. 15 minutes in, it was fully dark. The headlamps were good, bright, and the trail was clear enough. But there was something about the atmosphere that had shifted. The sounds of the forest changed. In the daytime, the Appalachian forest is alive with sound, bird calls, rustling, the distant percussion of woodpeckers. At night, it quiets down, but there's usually still something. Crickets. Frogs. Owls. But as they descended the back side of Greystone Ridge, the forest went completely silent. Not gradually quiet. Suddenly, completely, utterly silent. Rocket noticed it first. He stopped walking and held up his hand. They all stopped. Nothing. No insects. No wind. Nothing. Is that normal? Tiffany whispered. Nobody answered. They started walking again, a little faster now, the four of them bunching closer together. Josh was limping, and Mara kept glancing at him, torn between the need to move quickly and the awareness that he couldn't. That's when they heard the first sound. It came from the trees to the left of the trail, about 20 or 30 feet off the path. A sound that none of them could immediately identify. Mara described it to me as a kind of rhythmic clicking, almost mechanical, but clearly organic. Like a very large insect, but deeper, slower. They stopped again. All four headlamps swung to the left. The trees were dense there. Rhododendron and mountain laurel, thick and tangled. Their lights couldn't penetrate more than 10 or 15 feet into the undergrowth. The clicking continued for about 10 seconds and then stopped. "Animal," Josh said. His voice was slightly higher than normal. Asterisk. Definitely an animal. Let's keep moving. Asterisk. They moved. Faster now. Josh was pushing through the ankle pain. 2 minutes later, the clicking started again. But now it was on the right side of the trail. Tiffany grabbed Mara's arm. Neither of them said anything. They just walked faster. The clicking moved. Back to the left. Then ahead of them. Then, somehow, behind them. Whatever was making that sound was moving through the trees parallel to their trail, keeping pace with them. And it was fast, moving through dense undergrowth at a speed that didn't match any normal animal's cautious night movement. "Run," Rocket said quietly. "Josh can't." Mara started. "Run," he said again, and this time it wasn't quiet at all. They ran. Josh ran on his bad ankle, gasping with each step. Mara ran beside him, grabbing his arm to steady him. Tiffany and Rocket were just ahead. The clicking accelerated. It was all around them now, coming from multiple directions. And underneath the clicking, something else. A low sound that Mara said she felt more than heard. A vibration in the chest. A frequency that made her want to cry without knowing why. Tiffany screamed. Something had appeared on the trail ahead of them. Just at the edge of their headlamp beams. A shape. Tall. Thin. Standing completely still in the center of the trail. It didn't have the silhouette of a person, but it wasn't quite right for an animal either. It was tall, taller than a person, and it was standing upright, but the proportions were wrong. The limbs too long. The head too small, or maybe not at the right position on the torso. It was hard to tell because it wasn't moving and the headlamps were throwing everything into harsh shadows. They stopped dead. The clicking stopped. The low vibration stopped. The silence was total. The shape in the trail stood there for what Mara said felt like forever but was probably no more than 5 seconds. And then it moved off the trail into the trees to the right. Not running. Not crashing through the undergrowth. It simply moved into the trees and disappeared without making any sound at all. The silence held for another few seconds. And then, from behind them, from deep on the ridge above, they heard it. An echo. That clicking sound, but longer, slower, played back at them from the mountain above as though the ridge itself was repeating it. They ran. They didn't stop until they reached the campsite. They didn't make a fire. They got in their tents and they lay there in absolute silence until dawn. In the morning, Josh's ankle was badly swollen. They hiked out without stopping. The 4 of them have talked about that night many times since. Rocket, who laughed at the old woman's warning, is now the most adamant among them that what they encountered was not a bear, not a coyote, not any animal he can identify. Tiffany looked into the local history of that area and found references in old Cherokee oral tradition to something called the Ridge Walkers, entities that were said to use the natural acoustics of mountain ridges to communicate, to hunt, and to warn. The accounts described them as tall, thin, bipedal, and deeply uncomfortable with being seen. Mara reached out to the woman at the general store afterward. She called the store's number and asked about the woman she'd spoken to. The person who answered said there was no woman matching that description working at the store. And hadn't been for years. The third story tonight is the one that disturbed me the most when I first read it. Not because it involves anything particularly violent, but because of what it implies. Because if the person who sent it to me is telling the truth, and I believe they are, then it suggests something about these mountains that I'm not sure any of us are ready to fully accept. This story comes from a woman named Elise Huang. She's a geologist. She works for a natural resource survey company and has spent most of her career in remote fieldwork, deserts, coastlines, mountain ranges all over the western United States. She is, by her own description, a deeply skeptical person. She does not believe in the supernatural. She does not tell ghost stories around campfires. She is a scientist, and she believes in evidence. What happened to her in the northern Cascades of Washington state in August of 2022 did not change her beliefs. But it did, she says, permanently change her relationship with silence. Elise was working alone, which was technically against company protocol, but this was a simple 2-day soil and rock sampling survey in a relatively accessible part of the Cascades. She'd done dozens of these solo trips without incident. She knew what she was doing. She hiked in Tuesday morning, set up her base camp at around 6,000 feet elevation, and spent most of the day taking samples and making notes. Professional, methodical work. The kind of field work she could do in her sleep. That evening, while she was eating dinner at her campsite, she heard something that she initially assumed was a hiker in distress. A voice. Coming from the rocky slope above her campsite. It was hard to make out exactly what it was saying at first. The mountain terrain muffles and distorts sound in complex ways, and voices especially tend to bounce and fragment. But it was clearly a human voice. A woman's voice, she thought. Calling out something, repeating it. Elise stood up and listened. She tried to call back. Hello? Are you okay? Do you need help? But the voice just kept going, the same pattern, the same repeating sound. She grabbed her headlamp and started up the slope. Now, this is where I need to give you some geological context, because it matters. Elise explained to me that the Cascades, in certain areas, are riddled with lava tubes and volcanic caves, hollow spaces inside the rock formed by ancient volcanic activity. Some of them are mapped. Many of them are not. And these hollow spaces inside the mountain create acoustic phenomena that can be genuinely bizarre. Sounds from inside the mountain can carry through cracks and vents in the rock, sometimes traveling hundreds of feet before emerging. Hikers and geologists have reported hearing strange sounds from the ground for generations in certain parts of the Cascades. Elise knew all of this. She was a geologist. But what she heard as she climbed the slope that evening still stopped her cold. Because as she got closer to the rocky outcropping where the voice seemed to be originating, she realized it wasn't coming from the slope. It was coming from inside the slope. From inside the rock itself. She pressed her hand to the stone and felt it, a faint vibration corresponding to the sound. The voice was resonating through the rock. As though something deep within the mountain was producing a sound that was traveling upward through the stone and emerging from a crack in the outcropping just above her. And now that she was close enough, she could make out the words. She stood there with her hand pressed flat against cold volcanic rock, and she listened to a woman's voice say, over and over and over, I can hear you breathing. I can hear you breathing. I can hear you breathing. Elise told me she felt two things simultaneously. The geological part of her brain was running through rational explanations, infrasound, resonance, acoustic pipes in the rock, wind moving through subterranean chambers and creating something that sounded like speech. All of these things are real phenomena. All of them could theoretically explain what she was hearing. But the other part of her brain, the old part, the part that we evolved with long before we invented science and reason, that part was absolutely screaming. She took her hand off the rock. The vibration stopped. The voice stopped. The mountain went completely silent. Elise stood there in the sudden silence for a long moment. She told me the silence itself felt wrong. Mountain environments are never truly silent. There's always wind, or water, or the small sounds of small animals. But for about 30 seconds, there was absolutely nothing. And then the voice came back. Same words. I can hear you breathing. Asterisk. But now it wasn't coming from the crack in the rock above her. It was coming from the crack in the rock below her feet. Down at ground level, just a hairline fissure in the stone. As though whatever was producing the sound inside the mountain had moved. Elise is a scientist, and her scientific mind told her that what she had just experienced was a sound traveling through a connected tunnel system inside the rock. The acoustic pipe had simply shifted, finding a different exit point. Completely explainable. She walked back to her camp. She told me she almost convinced herself on the walk back. Almost. But then she lay in her tent, in the dark, listening to the mountain. And just at the threshold of hearing, so quiet she couldn't be absolutely sure it wasn't her imagination, she heard it one more time. Asterisk. I can hear you breathing. Asterisk. From directly beneath her tent. Elise packed up in the dark at 3 a.m. and hiked out to her vehicle without stopping. She filed her geological report, and noted the presence of what she classified as an unmapped lava tube system in the area, likely with an extensive subterranean acoustic network. She did not include in her official report what she had heard. But she told me one other thing, almost as an afterthought, that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She said that when she listened to that voice, whatever it was, whatever was producing it, the thing that terrified her most wasn't the words themselves. It was that the voice sounded exactly like hers. The fourth and final story tonight is the one I've been most hesitant to share. Not because I doubt the person who told it to me. I don't. Her name is Rachel Okafor, and she's been a licensed wilderness guide for 12 years. She's professional, experienced, level-headed, and credible. She has no reason to make this up and a professional reason not to share it. She reached out to me privately, specifically because she said she needed to tell it to someone who wouldn't think she was crazy. I don't think she's crazy. This happened in the summer of 2023, in the Rocky Mountains of Montana, on a peak that Rachel regularly guides clients up for summit ascents. She's been up this particular mountain over 40 times. She knows it as well as she knows her own neighborhood. The group was small, just Rachel and 2 clients, a married couple named Paul and Diane, both experienced hikers in their early 50s. This was a one-day summit push, starting before dawn and aiming to top out by midday, descend and be back at the trailhead before dark. Standard protocol. Rachel had done it 100 times. The ascent went perfectly. Perfect weather, perfect conditions, perfect clients. Paul and Diane were strong hikers, didn't complain, kept a good pace. They summited just before 11 in the morning, which was even faster than Rachel had planned. The summit was spectacular. A clear day, wind low for that elevation, a 360-degree view that Rachel said still took her breath away even after 40 times. They ate lunch on the summit, rested for about 30 minutes, and then it was time for the summit photos. This is always the best part for Rachel, seeing the joy on her clients' faces when they pull out their phones and take that photo at the top of the world. Paul and Diane wanted a photo together. They asked Rachel to take it. She took their phone, stepped back a few feet, and framed them up with the sweeping mountain panorama behind them. She took 3 or 4 shots, handed the phone back to Paul, and they all agreed it was time to start the descent. The descent took about 4 hours. Uneventful. Perfect weather all the way back down. At the trailhead, Paul and Diane were going through their summit photos, delighted, showing Rachel. Good shots. Everyone looked happy. The mountain looked magnificent behind them. And then Paul stopped scrolling. His face changed. He held the phone out to Rachel without saying anything. She looked at the photo. Paul and Diane were in the foreground, smiling, arms around each other, exactly as she'd photographed them. The summit view behind them was stunning, exactly as she remembered. But behind them, maybe 20 feet back, standing at the edge of the summit plateau where the ground dropped away sharply into the rocky face below, there was a figure. Tall. Dark. Wearing what appeared to be old clothing, not hiking gear, not modern outdoor apparel, but something older and heavier and wrong for the weather. The figure was facing toward the camera. Toward Paul and Diane. Rachel stared at the photo for a long time. She knew for a fact, she would stake everything on this fact, that there had been nobody else on that summit. She had scanned the entire summit plateau when they arrived, as she always did, because it was part of her professional safety protocol. She had checked periodically throughout their rest. She had been there for every moment. There had been no one else there. She even thought back carefully to the moment she'd taken the photo. She remembered exactly what she'd seen through the phone's frame. Paul. Diane. Sky. Rock. No one else. But in the photo, the figure was undeniably there. Rachel took the phone from Paul with shaking hands and zoomed in on the figure. It was standing perfectly still. Its face was in shadow, despite the fact that it was midday and the sun was directly overhead with no cloud cover. As though the shadow were its face. As though the darkness were simply where its face should be. And its hands were raised slightly at its sides, palms out, in a gesture that Rachel said she'd only seen once before in her life. At her grandmother's funeral. When the body was in the open casket. The mortician had positioned the hands exactly that way. Palms out. Like an offering. Or like a greeting. Or like a goodbye. Rachel blew up the photo on her laptop when she got home and studied it for hours. She consulted photographer friends about whether it could be a reflection, a lens artifact, an accidental double exposure. None of them could explain it. She went back up the mountain 2 weeks later, alone, on a day off, and stood exactly where she had stood when she'd taken the photo. She looked at the spot where the figure had been. There was nothing there but a sheer cliff edge. A drop of several hundred feet. To have been standing where the figure stood, you would have had to be standing on nothing. On air. Over the edge. She pulled out her own phone and took a photo of that exact spot. She looked at it immediately. The summit behind her was empty. She breathed. She exhaled with relief. She went to put her phone in her pocket. And then a notification appeared on the screen. The kind that tells you your phone has automatically grouped new photos with similar images. Her phone said, "New memory, 2 photos." Her phone thought the photo she'd just taken matched another photo. She opened the group set. Her new photo of the empty summit. And a photo she had never taken, had never seen, had no memory of, that had somehow appeared in her camera roll, with a timestamp from that very afternoon. It showed the summit from an angle she had never photographed. From below the summit. Looking up. As if taken from the cliff face, from the air, from the impossible place where the figure had been standing. And in this photo, in the distance, small but clear, you could see a tiny figure standing on the summit. A woman. Standing alone. Looking down. Looking down right at where the photo had been taken from. Rachel closed the photo. She walked off the mountain, and she hasn't been back since. She's a wilderness guide. She guides in other ranges now. Other peaks. But never that one. And sometimes, when she's out in the mountains with a client and they ask her to take a summit photo, she hesitates. Just for a moment. She takes the photo. And then immediately, before she hands the phone back, she checks. She always checks. For mountains. For stories. For people who walked into the peaks looking for peace, or adventure, or purpose, or perspective. and 4 people who found something else entirely waiting for them up there. Daniel never went back to the San Juan Mountains. He still sometimes wakes up in the night and walks to his bedroom window and looks out at the darkest part of his backyard, the corner where the shadows are thickest, and he can't explain why. Mara, Josh, Tiffany, and Rocket graduated and went their separate ways. But every September, no matter where they are in the world, they all text each other on the same night. The anniversary. No one planned this. It just started happening. Elise still works as a geologist. She still goes into the field. But she told me she can no longer work in complete silence. She always plays music from her phone now. Something to fill the quiet. Something to make sure that when she hears a voice, she knows it came from the speaker. And Rachel still guides. Still loves the mountains. But she asked me one thing before we ended our conversation. She asked me, if you ever go up to a summit, and someone offers to take your photo, just do one thing for her. Before you smile for the camera, turn around. Check what's behind you. The mountains are beautiful. The mountains are ancient. And the mountains, as these 4 people learned, are not always empty. Sometimes the silence is just the mountain, listening. And sometimes, when you call out into that wide, open, beautiful wilderness, something calls back. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories. If you want to share your own story with us, send it to us at belladarktales@gmail.com. You might just be featured in our next video. Stay safe out there. And maybe, stay off the mountain after dark.